Good. Would you ask Mr. Booth to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Booth, ready to carry on?
Yes, I am.
Good, thank you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Booth. So we know that there are 2 points in time when the contractual obligations of Artelia were addressed. First in August 2012, when the standard RICS terms of engagement are proposed, and then a variation in July 2014, when the contract documents are formally signed. Do you recall that?
So I'm aware of the contract that we sign up to, our
Yeah.
terms of condition.
When you started in 2012, what was your understanding of the contractual position of Artelia?
So I was introduced and told by Robert Powell and Simon Cash that we were performing 3 duties: employer's agent, which would be the role that I would be taking on, quantity surveyor, which was Chi Chen Lin, and we were also the CDMC,
Yeah.
which was Keith Bushell. So,
Yeah.
and they took me through where the project was as part of my getting up to speed on the project.
Yeah. Let's just look at a document on this. This is the fee proposal. If we go to ART 406358, we can see that it's before your involvement in the project, but it's the 2nd of May 2012, and it's to Mark Anderson. And we can see from the first paragraph that this is an offer for those 3 services that you've just described there. So we can see further to our recent conversation outline briefing, and then the second line, I have pleasure in setting out our proposal for the provision of quantity surveying, employer's agent and CDM coordinator services in connection with the proposed improvement works to Grenfell Tower. You see that there?
Yes.
And just to be absolutely clear, was it your understanding when you joined the project that Artelia had offered employer's agent services and not project management services?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, during your work on the Grenfell project, the 2014 contract was agreed. We know that. Did you read through the July 2014 contract when it was agreed?
Yes.
And were you aware at that time of the exclusion, express exclusion of project management services when that was agreed?
Yes.
Is it your understanding that contractually Artelia was never obliged to provide any project management services?
I don't think we were, no.
Did you understand that someone else was performing a formal project management role on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment?
Yes.
And who was that? Who did you think was doing that?
It was a client-side role, so Claire Williams was the main role and that performed that, but prior to her there were other people like Paul Dunkerton and others. So I always understood it was the client that were fulfilling the project management role.
Yeah, but prior to Claire Williams joining the project, did you have a clear understanding of who was project managing from the client side?
Yes, Paul Dunkerton.
Right. Now, going back to Claire Williams, were you aware, were you ever informed about what training, skills and experience she had in project management?
So when she was introduced to me, I understood that she had experience of social housing elsewhere. She'd done capital projects, refurbishment projects for other social housing enterprises. So she seemed good fit to fulfil the duties that she was put forward for.
And did you understand that she'd fulfilled the role as project manager on some of those previous projects?
I didn't question her as to what she fulfilled the role as, but she came across as competent, knew about what she was talking about.
Did her skills and training appear to you to be equivalent to yours at that point?
I think we're different in terms of our experiences. She was very much experienced of delivering for housing association on their side refurbishment projects, and I was more being an employer's agent or as a consultant basis, a project manager.
I see, yeah. Now, can we now turn to the draft revised project brief from June 2013? This is ART 401219. Now, this is dated the 10th, I think it's the 10th of June 2013. We can see it's definitely June 2013 at the top of that page. And it describes the project title and the client there and a description of the project. And if we go on to page 5 within this document, we can see there the project team is set out. Do you see that there?
I do.
And you are listed with Robert Powell as the project manager. Do you see that there?
I do.
Who wrote this revised project brief? Can you recall?
I can't, but I think it might have been Robert Powell.
Right. It wasn't you then?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I know I was at meetings where this was discussed.
Yeah. We can see in this version that you seem to have made some comments on the draft. Look, if we look up at page 4, for example, we can see on the right-hand side there's some PB comments. Do you see those?
Yes, I do.
Are those your comments?
I believe they are, yes.
Yeah. So we can take it from this that you read this brief.
Yes.
And if we look at page 2 under contract and procurement, at the top of that page, and it's in the 3rd paragraph in the last sentence. So it begins that paragraph, the design team who have been involved in the project to date will remain appointed and will continue through to project completion. And then previous plans to novate all designers to the principal contractor are to be reviewed. And then it says this, Appleyards, who had previously acted as EAQS, will take on a full PMEA role in addition to their QS responsibilities and will fulfil the lead consultant role. Do you see that there?
I do.
So is it right that in this document, Artelia was putting forward a proposal to act as project manager as well as employer's agent?
I think, yeah, that's fair.
And can you help us, why was that proposal being put forward at this stage? What was the reason for that?
So this is the early part of me being involved still with the handover, and the project was in a sort of bit of a state of distress, and we were reforming through our status report around that sort of time as well in April and June. What was the project, because it had kind of hit a wall and wasn't getting anywhere. So there were a number of things that were being reviewed with the client as TMO as to how to reform the project to make sure we could move it forward, and we prepared a short-term action plan. And there were times where we were reviewing who was doing what, and you've refreshed my memory there. I think evidently at one point we were talking about being the PM or the lead consultant, but we didn't actually end up doing that in terms of appointment. I mean, in terms of who is the right person to fulfill the role of project manager, I actually think it rightly sat on the client side, because the wider scheme of responsibility for a project manager was going to be largely around, for this project, the complications for this project, so like resident liaison, lots of communication within all the other departments within the TMO. So I actually think it sat correctly in-house as a client side. I think it would be very difficult for Artelia or myself or anyone to actually fulfil the wider remit of project manager.
Right. You talked there about the project being in distress. Was it your perception that certainly Appleyard's understanding was that the project needed stronger project management at this point to move it forward?
I think it was before my time, but in my briefing as to where the project had got to, there were a number of contributing factors as to why the project had sort of stalled and got stuck, largely around negotiations with Leadbitter. That
Yeah.
wasn't progressing particularly well.
Yeah.
It was over budget, and so there was lots of discussion going back and forth about scope, what could be afforded.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at here is why were Appleyards proposing at this stage that there should be some form of professional project management on their part? What was the reason for that? Can you help us?
What was the reason? I think I don't know, but it needed it did need some clarity as to what are the next steps that were needed in the short-term plan.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we were talking it through with them, and it was considered whether or not we should take that role on, but ultimately we didn't.
Yeah. Can we move forward then to some minutes of a meeting 6th of June 2013? This is ART 409106. So we can see these are some minutes. TMO meeting, it says in the top there, 6th of June 2013, and we can see, I think, that you were the author of these minutes, is that correct? Underneath author, we have your name.
That's
So
correct.
you took the minutes.
I wrote to them, yes.
Yeah. And then if we look at item 1.1 on this same page, we can see it says PB, is that you, Phillip Booth?
Yes.
PB presented the draft revised project brief. It was agreed to insert overall project costs, including fees and surveys, not just construction costs. Subject to the proposed changes, the brief was approved. PB advised that following the inclusion of fees and surveys, a full picture of project affordability will be known, which may require revisiting the removal and additions to the project. So we've got the minute there. Now, is it right that the changes that were agreed in terms of this project brief were around including more about the overall project costs and fees and surveys?
Yes, from my memory, yeah.
And is it right that none of the changes were about the proposal that Artelia would act as project manager?
I don't recall this like vividly in my memory, but I don't think that was a part of the discussion of that meeting at all.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would have been on the minutes.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you recall any specific discussion about the project manager role and Artelia taking that up at this meeting?
I don't. I mean, this was a time where the fees and roles and responsibilities were being discussed and reviewed amongst the rest of the professional team as well. Yeah. And it was a combination of what needs to be done, how much has been spent to date, what needs to be set as the roles and responsibilities going forward. So it was like an iterative process at that time, and there were a few changes, as happens sometimes when you're negotiating terms and conditions of roles for the team.
But would you accept that if you read these minutes in conjunction with that revised proposal, it would suggest that Artelia was approved to act as project manager at this point?
I could see how that would be read from that, yes.
But was that your understanding at the time of this meeting, that Artelia had got that green light?
The brief had been approved, and I was concentrating at this time rather than on my specific terms and conditions of the appointment. I was concentrating on delivering the short-term plan that we'd put together.
Yeah. So if you'd been asked at the end of this meeting, going forward now, are you acting as project manager, what would you have said?
I probably would have said at that time, I may well have been fulfilling some of the duties as a consultant project manager.
Yeah. After this meeting, this is June 2013, were there ever any discussions with the TMO about whether Artelia was in fact to act as project manager as had been proposed in the brief?
No, it really wasn't something that was talked about.
Right.
I mean, I have to say, I've been party to causing some of this confusion here by writing myself down as project manager, because that's like my job title at Artelia.
Yeah.
So, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry for that confusion.
Yeah. Was there, what we're trying to get at is, was there a period of time when Artelia did consider itself as acting as project manager?
I don't particularly feel there was. No. I mean, it's not a hard line in industry like you that you've been an employer's agent or project manager. They're quite close as roles. But in terms of, even if I was never given any authority limits by the client. The client was always at almost every meeting we went to, if you look at all our meetings. So in terms of fulfilling a role as project manager, if I did through pre actually signing our appointment, it was always, I was never making decisions on behalf of the client, because they were very hands-on, they were very experienced, they were very there and involved. Usually when I'm employed as a project manager, it's because a client is perhaps not got the resource to dedicate to a project, so I'd be representing them without them being present there, or making decisions with authority limits, maybe like up to £10,000 or something like that. That was never here. This was, so whatever label you put on it, I was organising and orchestrating, whether you call it an EA or a project manager.
To your knowledge, was it ever minuted in a meeting that Artelia was not acting as project manager?
No, but I think, I think it was understood by everybody that our appointment was as employer's agent, but because that was what our appointment documents were, and I think TMO were clear that they were the project manager, but we had project management capabilities.
I see.
And sometimes we did help out.
Yeah. Would you accept that this might have been confusing for the TMO, including Claire Williams, in terms of whether Artelia was itself acting as project manager?
Maybe, but she never raised it with me, and they were very vociferous in going through our appointment document. I mean, they were a very diligent client. There's correspondence that going through our appointment documents, checking every tick box and every line, and it'd been negotiated over a long period of time. That's why it took so long to actually be signed up to. In the end, it was scrutinised heavily by Jenny Jackson as their procurement expert, plus Claire and others. So I don't think she was in doubt, but I can see that we didn't help by calling ourselves a project manager.
Yeah. I mean, that was the subject of my next set of questions, in that do you accept that there are times when you are describing yourself as project manager?
Yes.
Because that, as I understand it, one of the points you make in your witness statement is that was what you were known as within Artelia. You were a project manager.
Yes. I still am, yeah.
Let's have a look at a few examples of that. If we can look at ART 408782. This is an email chain between you and Claire Williams and Peter Blythe from around March 2014 about the pre-construction agreement with Ryden. And if we go to the second email in the chain, which is at the bottom of page 1, there's an email from you, 27th of March at 12:30, and it's to Claire Williams. It starts there, Claire, and if we go over to the next page, you say this in the first line: I'm not a lawyer, so these comments are purely a recommendation as a project manager. You may wish to include the following additional activities to the appendix, and that's the appendix to the pre-construction agreement. So can you see here that you seem to be giving advice on describing yourself as a project manager? Do you see that?
I do.
And did you think you were giving that advice as project manager of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment or as a project manager within Artelia?
That comment was because she was asking my opinion on a legal document, and I was just wanted to be clear. I'm sharing my views from my professional opinion. So it wasn't that I was being the project manager on the job. I was saying I'm not a lawyer, but these are my thoughts on and my experiences to advise you on it.
Yeah.
Ms. Granger, it won't have escaped your attention that the reply from Claire Williams in the next email up
That's what I'm about to go to.
describes herself,
As a project manager. Yeah. Exactly. If we go up to the top where we started.
It's not uncommon to have a client-side project manager and a consultant project manager.
Yeah.
Because there are duties that just need to be done by the client.
Yeah. I think just to finish the chairman's point, what we see at the very bottom of this email from her back to you is she is described as the project manager. Just to so we can see that there. Can we go to another document? This is ART 406390. These are minutes of a contractor introduction meeting on the 1st of April 2014. And on the first page, we can see that these minutes were authored by Peter Blythe and they were checked by you. Do you see that?
Yes.
And on the first page, under present, we can see your name 4 lines down, and you're described there as the project manager and Peter Blythe as the assistant project manager. Do you see that?
I do.
And then below that, at point 1.2 in these minutes, it says Art, represented by PB, Phillip Booth, will perform the role of employer's agent on the project. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So we've got slightly contradicting information here between what's in the present list at the top and then what's said in the minutes.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
We're guilty of incorrectly representing our function in the present list.
Yeah. Do you know whether...
It's a job titles, sort of,
yeah,
rather than actual roles on the project, so...
Do you ever recall having a specific discussion with the TMO, Claire Williams or anyone else at the TMO, in which you explained what the difference was between employer's agent and project manager?
I spent a lot of time with Claire, taking her through roles and responsibilities. So I think over the passage of the year or so that we're working together, I did make it clear as to what my role was, what I was due to perform, and what she needed to do. So I think I'd taken the time and explained the roles and responsibilities to her, and I think she understood them as well, and she was familiar with it. She, as a professional, she was. She liked involving everybody in the project, and so it's fair to say as we went through, she'd share things with me and others and consulted quite a lot. Yeah. And was wanting to get people's opinions that may well be slightly outside our scope. And generally, if it helps, I sort of help. Yeah.
Just one more document on this theme. This is slides presented at the bidders conference to those that were bidding for the D&B contract. This is TMO 00856-136. And if we go within these slides to page 4, we can see there that Claire Williams is said to be project manager KCTMO, and then just a little bit down, your project manager Artelia. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you know, with the bidders, was the difference between your roles made clear at this meeting?
Not at this meeting. This was a bidders conference, so this is introducing. I didn't have a speaking role, and this was TMO presentation to get interested contractors a bit of a flavour of what the project was, so that they could decide whether they're going to tender or not. So I think me being put up there would have been not very interesting to most of them. But I think when we got into the contract stage, with doing the tendering and ultimately with Ryden as the contractor. They were very familiar that I was an employer's agent.
Right.
I didn't have any authority to make decisions, and they were very familiar that they needed to go to the TMO to get those sort of decisions made.
Yeah. Do you know, were you actually introduced as the project manager to the potential contractors at this point?
This slide says so, yes.
Yeah. Is it possible Claire Williams is also using her own internal TMO job title at this point?
Yes, that's possible.
Would you accept that, having looked at a number of these examples, it's possible that other professionals on the project outside the TMO might have had some confusion, or there might have been some confusion as to precisely what role Artelia was performing?
I think clearly, that you can pick some of those documents out, and it doesn't help. It does cause confusion. But I think the actual main professionals and everybody that was heavily involved in the project were very clear as to Artelia and my role, which was as an employer's agent.
We've heard some oral evidence from Mr. Bruce Soons from Studio E, and his evidence was that he believed Artelia was acting in a project management role. He said this is day 7, page 67, lines 13 to 17 for the transcript. He said, "I think for the duration of the project, I'd always assumed that Artelia was acting in some kind of project management role. Now I know that term is used loosely, but if I had been asked, that's what I would have said." Were you ever aware during the project that Studio E understood that Artelia was acting as some kind of project manager?
Obviously, yes, they had assumed that.
But were you aware of that on the project, that Studio E had made that assumption about you?
I think when I receive correspondence and people calling me a project manager, I don't jump on it and say, I'm not that, because that is my job role. So it wouldn't have caused me alarm if Bruce had thought I was doing that or wrote it in correspondence. So I can understand why he might have thought that we were doing it.
Yeah. Let's have a look at this point at the contractual schedule of services that was agreed in July 2014 for the employer's agent services. This is ART 405742. If we start at page 45, we can see what we're looking at. So this is the part of the RICS agreement, the signed agreement with the TMO that set out the EA services. And then if we go within this to page 48, we can see that certain individual services have either been crossed or not crossed, setting out what Artelia's role was. I think you confirmed you were aware of this at the time of your work as EA, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Was this a document that you looked at frequently? Did you come back to this to check exactly what roles Artelia were performing?
I was familiar with it. I wouldn't say I came back to it frequently.
Yeah.
The way I operate is I'm familiar with the general role I need to fulfil, and if I'm asked to do things, I just get on with it. I'm not a sort of person who goes back and go, well, not within my role, because I want to become a helpful professional.
Yeah. If we just look at the top left at 1.3.3, it says there, establish the roles and responsibilities of the client, the professional team, the contractor, and specialist/design subcontractors. And do we take it that you understood it was one of your roles on the project to establish the roles and responsibilities of the client and professional teams?
Yes.
And how did you go about doing that in practice?
So I went, first of all, the project team had already been set up when I joined the project, so there was already custom and practice in place and everybody sort of knew what they were doing. But prior to me, Artelia had prepared documents like the project execution plan that explained who was performing which role, and the professional team was defined and listed out. We had the architect, we had the services engineer, and we had the structural engineer. And so I think when I joined the project, the team was already set up.
Yeah.
I did help and establish roles and responsibilities by supporting the appointment of the other professional teams,
Yeah.
by clarifying roles and responsibilities at meetings through the minutes. But this duty as an employer's agent is more sort of setting up the high level principle of who does what, so the
Yeah.
high level roles, more so than going into the intricate details of specifics. But we knew we had a client, they were going to make decisions, we knew we were going to do a design and build route, and that there was going to be, we had architects, we had engineers, and we had structural and mechanical and electrical. And I think they all knew, they were all familiar with being in similar projects, what their roles were. The only bits that were sort of debated or talked about was, at one point there was who's going to be the lead consultant.
Yeah.
That ultimately ended up being Studio E.
Okay.
Who was ultimately responsible for design. That was Studio E.
Yeah. Okay.
And the project management bit that you've talked about.
The last part of that, you've got to establish the roles and responsibilities of the client, the professional team, the contractor, and then it says, and specialist stroke design subcontractors. Who would that have encompassed?
So this RICS appointment thing is obviously for all types of projects.
Yeah.
So there'll be different specialist designers and subcontractors depending on the specifics of a project. My experience is usually they're associated with design aspects.
Yeah.
That might be pertinent to the particular project. So if specialists were needed for a particular element, I'd expect my lead designer, the architect, to say, we need
Yeah.
one of these X, Y,
Yeah.
Z specialists.
So would a good example of that have been Exova, where we see Studio E encouraging the appointment of Exova to work on the fire strategy for the project? Would that have been a good example of that kind of specialist coming in to this team?
That they were one of the specialists that, Studio E did draw in and say that they think they needed one, yes.
Yeah. And did you understand that your job here to establish the roles and responsibilities of the list there would have incorporated Exova during their time on the Grenfell project?
So I don't think, as an employer's agent, I was responsible for defining the role of a specialist fire. I think mine was the roles and responsibilities of the client and the professional team who were defined in here as the three architects, 2 services engineers. I think it was then the specialist, the professional team, the design team that would bring in any specialists underneath them. I didn't have, in terms of Exova, I didn't have any dealings with them.
Okay. We'll come back to them later on as a more substantive topic, but I just wanted to get your view on this now. Going back to the project manager role, how did you make sure everyone was clear about Artelia's roles on the project?
Well, first of all, defining, having agreed terms and conditions as to what roles we were performing, introducing ourselves through meetings.
Yeah. But we know the contract terms don't come in and get signed until July 2014. That's what we're looking at here.
Yes.
So prior to that, do you remember taking any specific steps to make clear what Artelia's roles and responsibilities were and were not?
So whilst they weren't signed, these have been in circulation for a long time, and we had always, even back to 2012, before my time, the client was very aware we were going to be an employer's agent. So there are instances of minutes where I've talked about who the roles and responsibilities are, where I took people through who was doing what. There are schedules that are produced when we're, for example, getting ready to tender as to who was to provide what based upon their particular roles.
Yeah.
At no point in the project did people come to me and say, I'm not sure whose role is what or who's doing this. So it wasn't an issue it was not an issue as far as I was aware.
Okay. Do you ever remember taking any specific steps to make clear the limited sense in which Artelia was referring to its own staff as project manager or assistant project manager?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah. Did you ever take any specific steps to make clear the limited sense in which Artelia was referring to itself as project manager or assistant project manager?
No, I don't think. When you're saying limited, I think we just did our role, and there wasn't anything from my memory as a problem as to who was the project manager or not.
Okay. Now, as an employer's agent, just moving on to your role as employer's agent and sticking with these terms, was it your role, as you understood it, to advise the TMO client on what the building professionals were obliged to do contractually on the project?
I don't believe so, no.
So if that wasn't Artelia's role, who did you understand did have that role on the project?
So, again, when I came to the project, most of the professional team were already in place. Sometimes that is a duty that's put on the employer's agent to assist with that, but I think they didn't need it because they'd already gone about appointing the professional team. They'd already been operating for some time, familiar with, as a client, the TMO were familiar with running large construction projects and what services and what support they needed to buy in to support them and what they had in-house already.
If a contractor was not fulfilling its contractual obligations, was it your understanding that you were obliged to point that out?
Yes, if there was something that I thought somebody wasn't doing what they should, that I've got a duty of care to raise that if I saw it.
Yeah. Now, at page 47, if we go back a page of this schedule of employers' agent services, we can see on the right-hand side towards the bottom, well, in the second half of the page, we can see that 1.2.5, if we could zoom in on that left-hand column, yes, that's great. 1.2.5 advise the client on specialist services, including consultants, contractors, subcontractors and suppliers required in connection with the project. That's not ticked. And we can also see that 1.2.8 advise the client on the selection, the terms of appointment and fee structures. That's also not ticked. Can you just help us? What did you understand those exclusions? What did they get rid of in terms of your role?
I think they weren't ticked because the professional team was largely appointed when we were brought on, so that wasn't a service they needed.
Yeah. Now, going back to the 1.3.3 that we were looking at before on the next page, when you were fulfilling that obligation of establishing the roles and responsibilities of, and then the list, would you also identify if there was a role or responsibility that was missing?
Yes, I think if there was something obvious that we didn't have that was inhibiting the project, I would raise that to the client.
Yeah, and I think we heard from Mr. Cash yesterday that he agreed it would include identifying any gaps in services to be provided and that Artelia would look to close the gaps. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
If later in the project you realised that the roles and responsibilities of the building professionals on the project had become confused, would you tell the client pursuant to that obligation?
Yes.
And was it your role to help spot that and help remedy it?
I had a role in that, yes. I remember, as an example, later on in the project, it was brought to my attention that changes post-contract Claire was not sure how they should be managed and who was responsible for what. So that's a good example, and I remember drawing out a flow diagram that said, well, if nothing's changed from the what you tendered, then nothing needs to happen. If it's a mechanical, electrical design change, then I had a flow chart that went to Max Ford and would have a look at that and support you.
I'm going to take you to that flow chart in a little while. So, yeah, but I accept that that's an example of what you were just describing. Can we look at something that happened later in the project? If we can go to ART 406629. This is an email from Mr. Reed, who we know succeeded you as employer's agent, to Claire Williams on the 9th of April 2015. Now, we know you'd left the project at this stage, but this email records his perception of the project when he took over. And what we can see is he gives a numbered list. So he says, Claire, thanks for your email of yesterday suggesting a meeting to discuss Artelia's fee account. Then in the next line, he wants to propose a broader meeting objective for the following reasons. And then in the third sentence, he says, with my limited involvement to date, I hold a perception that, and he says, 1, the scope of the work that Ryden is doing is not as well understood as it could be. There is significant email traffic of what is considered to be in the contract. And then 2, the roles and responsibilities of all parties do not appear as clear to me as they could be. Processes for resident liaison, clerk of work scope, architectural compliance monitoring, for example. Now, I just want to ask you some things about this email. Do you agree with Mr. Reed that as of April 2015, Ryden's scope of work was not well understood? That's the point he's making at point 1.
I hadn't seen this email, but I think Ryden were familiar with what they were needed to do. I think Neil was new to the job, obviously, here, and without a doubt, there was considerable correspondence about, is this included? Do we need to do this? So I can see why Neil may well have felt that coming in and thinking we need to support this a bit more.
Did you yourself think that was a problem when you were the employer's agent?
Not necessarily a problem, but it was something that we were constantly having to actively manage. It's not unusual on projects that there's this sort of level of review, correspondence. I think it was exasperated a little bit by there were quite a lot of client changes post-contract, and I think that was adding to the number of queries and everything. Yeah. So usually when you go out, if you go out to tender on saying this is what I want, then that's what you want.
Yeah.
And you don't change lots of things afterwards.
Yeah. And when he says the scope of the work that Ryden is doing is not well understood as it could be, and I appreciate you didn't write this, but did you understand at the time that TMO wasn't understanding the scope of work that Ryden was doing? Or was it Ryden itself not understanding the role it was performing, the scope of its work?
I don't know. I can only my experience of the project when I was in charge was largely that this was around. I think Ryden knew what they were doing, but there was a lot of changes going on, and that was resource hungry
Right.
to manage those changes, as well as developing the design on from when they had it at at tender stage to take it then through to construction. It was complicated.
And what about point 2? He says the roles and responsibilities of all parties do not appear as clear to me as they could be. And then he gives some examples, and I just want to pick up on a couple of them. He's got COW scope, clerk of work scope. He says is not as clear as they could be. Had you detected that there was a difficulty in terms of the understanding of the scope of works by the clerk of works?
My experience of the clerk of works was that they were a direct appointment by TMO to check compliance and buildability, quality. So it was, there was a, what was their role? I can understand that being a question. When I was in the role of employer's agent, they were reporting to the TMO, saying we went on this date, we found these things, and a report was being issued to them. And I accepted those reports and was a sort of vehicle to take them up with Ryden if there was a, you need to fix this or you need to fix that.
Yeah.
And it was as simple as that. But we didn't get, as Artelia, we didn't really get involved in forming that scope of what they were due to do.
Yeah.
I saw clerk of works was purely an extra comfort level for the TMO, an extra reporting and compliance checking for them that we could use as employer's agent to pass on.
And just to be absolutely clear, the clerk of works, you talked about compliance checking. Do you mean compliance, say, with the building regulations? Was that your understanding that they were checking for that?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we've got architectural compliance monitoring as another example that he's given. Again, during your time on the project, were you ever aware of any problem with architectural compliance monitoring?
I didn't. Not that I did. I didn't think it was. There was a problem. I remember on the project that we spent some time with the TMO defining. There was a client design advisor role that we put forward as Artelia at one point, and that sat with them a long time before they decided not to take it forward. I did spend some time with Claire and others, making sure they understood that if we didn't have that, then they would be taken on that role.
I see.
So I think that's what that means by architectural compliance monitoring.
Did you ever establish a matrix of design responsibility on the project? Or were you aware that anyone else at Artelia did that?
So I believe just generally through the roles and responsibilities and by preparing the tender and things like that, we did divide up who was responsible for what.
But did you ever do a detailed matrix, say for the design of the project, setting out for each element of the works who had the design responsibility, where it sat? Did you ever do that kind of matrix?
I did not, I don't believe.
Are you familiar with such a matrix? Have you ever seen them on other projects?
Yes, I have.
Did anyone ever give any consideration to establishing such a design matrix on the Grenfell project?
I think that the design team knew the roles that they were performing, so it wasn't something that felt was required. I mean, this project, we didn't have a large number of designers. When I was pre-contract, it was very clear there was an architect, a mechanical electrical engineer, and a structural engineer, and they are familiar with their roles and responsibilities. And then post-contract, all design responsibility is with Ryden. So I didn't think a matrix was needed.
Okay. Can we just go back to the schedule of services for the employer's agent, back to ART 405742 on page 48? And I want to look at tick box 1.4.1 in that left column. It's further down the page. Yeah, there we have it. So there we can see it has been ticked that Artelia should prepare and maintain a project execution plan or similar management tool, identifying the roles and responsibilities of the client, the professional team, the contractor and specialist subcontractors / suppliers, and then establish review, approval, variation and reporting procedures and prepare recommendations for the client's approval. Now, do you agree that the role of employer's agent on the project included an obligation to create a project execution plan or similar management tool that set out clearly the roles and responsibilities of the parties on the project?
Yes.
And do you agree that this would include establishing the review, approval, variation and reporting procedures on the project?
Yes.
To the best of your knowledge, was any such plan or tool ever created and then monitored?
So there were project execution plans prepared, and various iterations before my time on the project, and then subsequently as we worked through the project, the various elements of the project execution plan and roles were clarified by our other documents, whether it be the actual appointment documents, or whether it be through minutes, or the flow diagram I talked about earlier was establishing how variations would be done. I did spend at this project. I spent quite a lot of time actually going through the roles and responsibilities and how, particularly post-contract, variations would be managed.
Yeah.
And there was that flow diagram I did, which spelt out the roles, clearly talking it through with everybody so they knew.
Yeah.
And there were trackers that were tracking changes that were put forward with the dates of who needed to approve what. So that's how I feel we discharge that duty of myself.
We can see that this responsibility here is to prepare and maintain a project execution plan. And as you say, and I'll take you to it in a minute, there was a project execution plan from November 2012. But in terms of maintaining it, did you yourself ever revisit that project execution plan and refresh it, particularly after the D&B contractor is appointed? And as you say, then you've got a different set of roles and responsibilities.
I didn't update the project execution plan later on. Usually it's written at the beginning. It's an execution, like to start off with usually in projects, so that everybody understands what's the project, who's doing what.
Yeah.
And you can go back and keep changing it, and that would be good to do. But I felt we had, when we got to the various stages in the project, it was documented in other vehicles, not the project execution plan, through minutes, through meetings, through talking it through. I felt everybody understood the different roles and responsibilities.
But you
I didn't go back and update it.
You didn't consolidate it in one place?
No.
Yeah. Let's just look at that plan. This is the last version of the plan we can find. This is at ART 408445. Now, if we go on a page, we think this is dated the 6th of November 2012. If we look at page 3, we can see there the date at the top right, and we can see that it's authored by David Hale and checked and approved by Alan Dawson. And I just want to look at a few pages within it. If we could look at page 10. Here we can see a section for roles and responsibilities, and we can see that the project manager there is said to be Mark Anderson of the TMO. Do you see that there?
Yes.
He's said to have day-to-day project management of the project. And if we look at the bottom of that page, under contractor and novated design team, we can see that some of it is TB, to be confirmed, post-construction services. Do you see that there? TBA,
yes.
to be advised. But as you say, we have some of the consultants already appointed. And then if we look on at page 11, if we look at the top of that page, we can see that this says lead consultant, employer's agent Alan Dawson, overall coordination and control, and then QS Tweechin Lim, CDM coordinator. Now that would have been superseded, wouldn't it, in that Studio E took on the lead consultant role, didn't they?
Yes.
And we can see here there's a box for, before we leave the top box, we can see we've got Fire Safety Surveyor Terry Ashton is named in this project execution plan, isn't he, as one of the client advisors. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we can see in the box below that the clerk of works is TBA, to be advised. Is that right?
Yes.
So would you agree with me that this is at quite an early stage, and what could have happened is we've refreshed this as the project went on to make clear exactly who was engaged and what their responsibilities were?
Yes.
And then if we just look briefly at page 15, we can see there are some sections here that deal with design changes. And there's discussion of a change control procedure that's set out here. Did you ever come to look at that? The change control procedure that was set out in this document?
I was familiar with it, yes.
Yeah. And we can see design development change is dealt with in a heading at the bottom of that. And it says for all changes, just below the bullet points, for all changes, the design team are requested to maintain a log of all changes arising to their individual drawings. Do you know if any such log was ever maintained?
Usually, any time a designer, like an architect or whatever, changes a drawing, a new version is created, and on the side of the drawing it says the date and what was changed.
Yeah.
And then there's drawing issue sheets that are issued out that say who it's been issued to. And
Was
so,
that
yes.
something that you ever looked at and checked that it was being done properly?
I saw the changes coming through as the design was developed.
But did you ever
Yes.
check that log?
Well, the log, whenever drawings were issued to me, they'd usually come with a drawing issue sheet,
Yeah.
and the log would be on the side. So I
see.
think yes.
And then at page 16, we get some general descriptions of quality management procedures. We can see under quality, the consultant team will adhere to QA procedures, of which this document is a part. And then it says, under quality control, the consultant team shall be responsible for the quality of their own work. And then the TMO will appoint a clerk of works to undertake quality assurance checks. Do you see that there?
Yes.
It's quite brief about quality management, isn't it, this document?
Yes, but an execution plan is quite high level usually at the beginning.
I see.
So I wouldn't be alarmed by it being short.
Okay. Now, you mentioned before this point about the client design advisor role, and I now want to ask you some questions about that. Can we go first to ART 40211? These are the final contract preliminaries which were prepared for the OJEU tender process for the main construction work. Okay. Were you familiar, at least in outline, with these contract preliminaries?
So Chui Chen wrote these and pulled them together.
Yeah.
But they are, yes, there's a piece of software that puts this all together.
Yeah.
I didn't write them, but I'm familiar with
Yeah.
them.
If we look on page 5, at the bottom of the page, I want to look at clause 195A. We can see there's reference to a client technical advisor, architectural, and it says name to be appointed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Is the client technical advisor in this document the same as what was also referred to on the project as a client design advisor?
I think there's similar roles, yes.
Yeah. And is it right that Artelia and the TMO both envisaged that a client design advisor would be appointed to advise on architectural design issues during the project?
I think so, yes. I mean, it's not always the case, because it depends on, the complexity of the project.
Yeah.
And, so you don't always have a technical advisor. Often it is performed by the client themselves,
I see. Yeah.
depending on how much support they feel they need.
But when Ryden received this, would you agree that they might have expected such a client technical advisor or client design advisor to be appointed?
Yes.
To your knowledge, was that role of client design advisor discussed with the TMO when these preliminaries were drawn up?
I don't know. I don't think it was perhaps, I don't recall it being a big subject matter that was talked about at that time, but I do know that TMO we spent a lot of time going through the tender and what was included and what was going out, days of taking through it. So I don't recall that particular bit being a large part, but it wasn't short after the tender that I think we gave them the proposals.
Yeah.
I think they were being familiar.
Just to complete what was in the tender documents, if we look at go to page 36 now, top of the page, at clause 158A, there's there reference again to the client technical advisor, and it says meaning client technical advisor is to advise client on contractors' proposals on architectural services issues. Do you see that there?
I do.
And then if we look at page 40, at the top of the page at clause 650, we can see a number of tasks for the client technical advisor that are set out in these preliminaries with regard to here, the tasks relating to drawings. And we can see at clause 650A that the client technical advisor will review the fabrication and shop drawings. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we look at paragraph 5 on this page, it says all clearance of contractors' drawings shall be given by the client technical advisor, clearance of drawings or materials for manufacture and works derived therefrom mean the permission of the client technical advisor to proceed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, at this stage, and given what we've just seen in these contract preliminaries, if that had been then followed through and someone appointed to that role, would they have advised on all of Ryden's drawings or only some of them?
I think they would have been primarily focused on drawings that were a change from the employer's requirements.
Yeah.
That's usually how that role is, the client design advisor support role is. But any drawings issued by the contractor, who is a design contractor, I'd expect the client advisor to have had a review of in that role. But primarily it's to support changes from what was asked for in the employer's requirements at tender stage to what was actually being proposed as an alternative.
Yes, I understand. Yes. Would it have also included advising on subcontractor drawings, such as Harley, the external wall subcontractor? Might it have included looking at subcontractor drawings as well as any drawings from the main contractor?
Yes.
Yeah.
They would have had to have come through the main contractor. So I think there's a duty for the main contractor, that was Ryden, to sort of coordinate the design amongst all of their designers, and then issue them to the client or the client design advisor as a package for review.
Yeah. And what about changes to specifications, for example, as a result of a value engineering exercise? Would you have expected this client technical advisor to have advised on any changes to the materials in the specifications?
They would, yes.
It appears from these preliminaries that the client technical advisor would, quote, clear drawings or materials. There's reference to clearance in both subparagraphs 5 and 6 on that page. Can you just help us as to what it would be expected that this person would check for in such a clearance process?
I interpret that as, so the client design advisor or the client has no design responsibility. They're not drawing it or specifying it. They are saying, yes, I accept that what you're proposing as a change is acceptable, as in it is comparable to what we asked for in the employer's requirements, or it's a client change request. So that the clearance, I think, would encompass not only, yes, we would like, that's okay with that change. I think that there is a duty of checking that conforms, But really, I think the main design responsibility sits on the contractor that's
Yeah.
proposing it.
Yeah.
So they are ultimately responsible for the design. This is more of a check-in and a clearance, not responsibility.
Yeah. Now, if we move forward then as to what happened about the client design advisor, if we go to ART 408591, this is an email from you to Simon Cash on the 10th of January 2014, and you say Claire wishes for us to put forward a proposal for the CDA role. As the custodian of free proposals and scopes, please can I ask you to do this? I know they're considering others, one-man bands, but they have PI concerns. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you just help us? What discussion did you have with Claire Williams at this time about the CDA role?
It doesn't register as a strong memory of mine, but I think she, reading that, she was recognising that she may need some support and wanted us to, and she was considering others, and she wanted Artelia to put forward a proposal to fulfil that role.
Yeah. Can you recall actually positively encouraging Claire Williams and the TMO to appoint a client design advisor on this project?
I certainly made her aware of our proposal and felt that it was something that if she didn't take up, then she needed to understand what she was taking on as responsibility.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you could describe that as encouraging, yes.
Was it your view at the time that this job needed a client design advisor to be appointed?
It comes down to resource levels and of client and how much support they feel they need. It isn't a role that's regularly involved in projects. It is definitely on more complicated design and build projects when the client wants that reassurance and support from a professional.
Yeah.
So I think it was more of a client decision as to
Yeah.
they need that support or not.
Yeah.
And-
I understand that entirely. But I think you said earlier that you agreed that the Grenfell project was quite a complex project in terms of what they were seeking to do. You've got an occupied building, it's quite an old building, You're trying to add things on to existing services, you're overcladding it, you're restructuring the lower floors. I just want to ask you again, if someone had come up to you at this time and said, do you think this project needs a client design advisor, what would you have said?
I think I would have said that, yes, it needs one, but the TMO had a massive team. Some of them were architects, some of them were fire engineers, so I wasn't concerned when they said, we'll take it on ourselves.
Okay. Yeah. So let's look at the client design advisor proposal. You then put it forward. This is ART 406279. And it's dated February 2014. We can see that proposal there. This is the front page and the date at the bottom. And then if we go to page 6 and look at the top of the page, paragraph 3.1, we can see that Artelia is saying there that they've performed this role on other similar projects, including the Calc project. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Were you yourself involved at all with the Calc project?
No.
No. And then down under scheme design in the middle of this page, there's mention of a design compliance report. So as part of this proposal, it says, we will provide a design compliance report at pre-contract award stage following a review of the construction or contractor's proposals and endeavour to ensure that they meet the employer's requirements, NBS specifications, British and European standards, as well as all statutory and planning requirements. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So is it right that this role would have included checking the contractor's proposals for compliance with the building regulations?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. And would you have expected that to have also included checking for compliance with the statutory practical guidance, for example, in something like approved document B on fire safety?
Yes.
Would you have expected that exercise to pick up the extent to which the employer's requirements themselves, including the NBS specification, were not compliant with the building regulations? Do you think that's something that this role would have picked up?
Possibly, yes. I mean, I didn't write this, and this was written by, one of our architects at Artelia that's familiar with performing that role. So
Yes, it's Rishmal Harding, is that correct?
So
yes.
From my understanding, I think that would have been picked up. But,
Yeah. And then the next paragraph, it says, once the contract is let, we will review detailed drawings as they are produced to ensure the works proposed continue to meet the employer's requirements. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And in terms of the extent of the advice that Artelia was proposing a CDA might give, is it right that any CDA would not have advised on M&E elements?
So, not within this proposal, because the arrangement here was that Max Fordham were retained by the client themselves, so they were reviewing the mechanical and electrical elements.
Yeah.
And it was the architectural elements that TMO did not have a retained professional to comment on. That's why this was just on the architectural aspects.
Yeah, I understand. Now, I appreciate you said earlier that a client design advisor isn't appointed for all projects.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, would it be standard or usual to appoint such a person on a project like this, on a refurb project such as Grenfell?
It's not unusual. It also comes down to, the level of trust placed in the design and build contractor, because this is a check-in role. So they don't have any design responsibilities. It's really just checking, are the lead design, the people that's responsible for design, compliant. The responsibility for complying still sits with the designers. So I think that's why this role, it comes down to how competent the client is and how much that they're likely to receive on a project that will require their comment in terms of changes.
Yeah. But on a project like this that underwent quite a significant value engineering exercise, was that perhaps another reason why a client design advisor would be a good idea?
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
Now, if we go on in the chronology to ART 406523, this is an email from you to Simon Cash dated the 4th of February 2014. And in the third paragraph of this email, you say, please also see CDA proposal prepared by Rishmal for your consideration. We wanted to ensure that there was a clear definition between what I am doing as EA and what Rishmal will do. I have reviewed the EA scope of services as submitted, and sign-off responsibility under the EA services only refers to preparing and maintaining a handover report, 1.5.9, and issue instructions on behalf of the client, 1.1.2. Now, where you're referring to sign-off responsibility there, can you just help us as to what you mean, sign-off responsibility under the EA services? Is that signing off design work? What is that?
I remember this because Claire Williams was wanting to make sure was there responsibilities from an employer's agent to sign off and approve like drawings and things like that, and I was saying no, there isn't. That's not included in an employer's agent scope of services. So that's where we then needed to put the CDA proposal together, and this was me just internally with Simon, everyone just checking that was really clear, so that when Claire received it, she could see that's Philip's role,
Yeah.
and that there's no duplication. She's not paying twice for what the CDA proposal was.
Yeah. If we just pick up your witness statement at this point, this is your second witness statement at page 2, so that's ART 409420. And I want to look at what you say at paragraph 7. So you say this: I wanted to ensure that there could be no question about whether the CDA proposal was an offer of new services from Artelia that were not currently covered by our existing obligations, existing employer's agent obligations. From my review of the scope of Artelia's EA services under the project, I was clear that that was the case. The CDA role would have involved Artelia considering design on the project. This is why it would have been carried out by Rishmal Harding, a qualified architect. Artelia's existing appointment as EA, QS and CDMC expressly provided that Artelia was not responsible for design. Accordingly, the services offered by Artelia under the CDA proposal were new ones and not covered by its existing appointment. I believe that Miss Williams understood this. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, in this statement, you mention a review of the scope of the EA services. What did that review comprise? Were you just looking at the schedule of EA services we've taken you to?
Yeah, me going back to from the sort of query from Claire as to say, well, you're going to sign off some of these designs or review these, and my response being, well, no. I wanted to check that that was in accordance with what we ticked in the EA services, so it was just my internal review.
Did you consider at this point the obligations of the CDM coordinator in any such scope review? So did you take into account the extent to which Artelia would, in its role as CDM coordinator, perhaps have some responsibility for ensuring that designers were of an appropriate competence, were organising themselves in the right way, doing the right risk assessments? Did you take that into account?
I don't remember taking that into account, no. The CDM's not, it's different to a CDA. There's a lot of acronyms, isn't it? But CDM is more around making sure that the works are carried out safely, and then that at the end, information is handed over so the client can look after the building and maintain it appropriately. It doesn't. My understanding of that role is that they don't do design reviews like what was being queried by Claire.
Yeah, I understand. In your mind, is there ever any crossover of roles between the CDM coordinator and a client design advisor?
I've not come across that, no.
Okay.
They're called something different now as well.
And did you ever explain to Claire Williams that, in your opinion, the CDA role was truly additional to your employer's agent role?
Yes, it was separate.
Did you ever explain to Claire Williams that you, yourself, as employer's agent, could not perform a role like the client design advisor role, the CDA role? Did you ever say that to her?
I did.
Did you ever explain to her the importance of appointing a CDA on a project like Grenfell?
I spent some time with her, taking her through our proposal and why I thought she should have it. And there was, she was wanting to understand it a bit better, and she also wanted to sort of understand what things they might be needing to review, particularly when the point of the project where it was in terms of how far the design had gone. And she was very clear that she felt that the TMO, with their experience and expertise, they didn't need this extra support and services. They had the knowledge within their own organisation, and they could do it themselves and did not need the additional fees or the support that we were offering.
Yeah. Now, we know that it took the TMO some 6 months after this proposal was made to respond to it. Do you know why it took them so long? Were you ever given an explanation for that?
I think it just took that long because at the time, from the February that we issued it, we were still in the tender stage. So there was nothing for the CDA to review because we were going through the tender exercise, and we didn't actually get that completed, I think, till later in the sort of Easter time, till Ryden came on board. So it came more to the forefront of them needing to make a decision later on that summer, when actually now contractors' proposals were starting to come through for them to consider. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a role that was needed in February, but we were trying to plan ahead.
Yeah, I see.
I think that's why it took so long.
Yeah.
And they were also, as the TMO, budget, as you can clearly see, was a key consideration on this project, and they were not wanting to necessarily incur additional fees. So I think that's why it sort of sat in for consideration later.
Yeah. Did they expressly say that to you? We don't want to incur the additional fees.
Well, yes, they were very much about, do we need this role? It's 30 grand or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we just look at a set of minutes? This is ART 402752. So we've gone forward in time now to the 19th of August 2014. This is progress meeting number 2. And we can see you were present at this meeting from the list on that first page. And if we can go to the second page of these minutes, at item 3.1, it says there, we've got a minute, CW to appoint a client design advisor, so Claire Williams to appoint a client design advisor. And then we've got a post-meeting note. CW advised that the TMO will perform the role of the CDA in-house. They will therefore need to sign off all design. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So it appears that there was some discussion of this at the meeting, and then a post-meeting note is added afterwards saying the TMO have decided to do it in-house. Can you remember what was discussed at the meeting about this role?
I remember talking to Claire, her asking me, do we need this? What will this role include? What sort of things are they likely to be reviewing? And taking her through that. She went away and had a think about it, and she decided afterwards, that's why we put it as a post-meeting note, that they could do it themselves.
Yeah.
There was, that's what I remember.
Yeah. Now, in your witness statement, this is your second witness statement, paragraph 12, you say you remember telling Claire Williams that if the TMO was going to take on the role, it would need to sign off future designs. Is that right? You said that to her?
Yeah. So, again, changes proposed. There's no design responsibility, but they'd need to say, yes, we're happy with that to proceed. So it's a check-in role still, but they would need to agree it. I couldn't as employer's agent.
And you say also that you did not say that cladding would be excluded from that. That's your memory, is it?
No, I definitely did not say cladding would be excluded.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I don't know, I'm not clear, but I think she was reassured by the fact that obviously there were specialist cladding advisors coming in, and that there were warranties, product warranties and product guarantees that come with the cladding.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yes, that is true, but you all still need to sign it off. And she was reassured by having those extra checks and balances.
Yeah, great. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment. I'm halfway through this topic, but we can...
probably better to have
a good
a break
time
now,
to break.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Mr. Booth, we're going to have a short break now. Okay. We'll come back at 20 to 4, and I'd ask you again not to talk to anyone about your evidence when you're out of the room.
Of course.
All right? Would you like to go to the usher, please? Right, 20 to 4, please.
Thank you.
Yep. Would you ask Mr. Booth to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Booth, you feeling okay?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
All right.
Yes,
If you have a problem, just indicate.
No, thank you. Someone's very kindly given me some paracetamol.
All right,
That's fine.
that's good. Ms. Gange?
Thank you. Yes, so carrying on with the client design advisor story, can we now go to ART 406464? And I want to look at the bottom of page 2. There we see 29th of August 2014 at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. There's an email to you and Peter Blythe. And she says, last Tuesday we talked about the appointment of a design advisor and the likelihood that this did not particularly apply to cladding and M&E elements which were designed and under guarantee. Upon discussion, most of the design concerns were over the new build areas, i.e. the flats, nursery and boxing club. I've spoken to David Gibson and we are going to see if we can manage this within the TMO, as we are very familiar with the specifications for social housing. We will monitor how this is working, as presumably all proposals for comment will have a respond by date. Can you please send any design proposals to myself, CC David Gibson? So this is her rejection of that client design advisor proposal. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And just looking at what she says, had you had a discussion about that role likely not applying to cladding and M&E elements which were designed and under guarantee?
No, I don't. I did not say to her that cladding would be excluded. As I said before, I think she was taking assurances from the fact that some packages would come with product and warranties and guarantees, and the cladding was one of those. The M&E very clearly wouldn't sit within the CDA role because she had Max Forden supporting her. But the cladding, would be something that she would have to, as it being changed, she would have to sort of review and comment on. And there's been lots of reviews and considerations of various types of cladding on this project by this time.
Yeah. So you don't agree that that's something that you suggested, that it didn't particularly apply to cladding?
No. In fact, quite the reverse. I think I was almost saying, look, this is area that, whilst you might know social housing and what the appropriate thing is for a kitchen or whatever, I was saying that if you had a client design advisor, then they'd be able to support you in everything. If you accept it as yourself as a responsibility, then you'll have to do everything bar M&E elements.
And do you recall specifically highlighting the cladding in that discussion with her as an example of that?
As a memory, I have that, yes.
Yeah. The next part in that first paragraph, she says, upon discussion, most of the design concerns were over the new build areas, i.e. flats, nursery and boxing club. Again, was that something you'd discussed and said to her, or was that something that was new to you when you got this email?
No, so the area that there was most design happening was the area that new facilities were being created, so the lower levels.
Yeah.
In the actual flats themselves, there wasn't a great deal of design required because it was, new heating and new windows. So I think I did have a conversation with her around, okay, and that was where a lot of the change was around what those lower levels would be.
Yeah.
So and she was comfortable with taking on that responsibility because she felt that was within her, area of expertise.
Yeah. And we can see in that second paragraph, she says that she's spoken to David Gibson and we're going to see if we can manage this. As we are very familiar with the specifications for social housing, were you of the view, when you read that email, that being familiar with the specifications for social housing was a relevant consideration in terms of whether to appoint a CDA on the project?
It would help fulfilling that role, yes.
So that would be a relevant consideration in your view?
Yes.
And then in your witness statement, your first witness statement at paragraph 148 on page 44, you say it was your impression that the TMO considered they were better placed to take on the role as they were informed about residents' needs and the internal specifications for the flats. Did you agree with the TMO's view that they were better placed to act as client design advisor?
So they were certainly better placed to understand the needs of their residents because they work with them all the time. And Artelia's CDA wouldn't have that level of understanding. Same with boxing club and things like that. So, yeah, I agree that they were well placed to review those elements that they would be reviewing against. So if they were proposing a particular thing, change to the spec of the boxing room, boxing club showers or something, I don't know, then they'd be closer to that.
But again, that expertise wouldn't apply to all of it, would it, including the overcladding?
True, yes.
Yeah. Did you think at the time that Claire Williams or David Gibson's skills were comparable with Rishmal Harding's skills when it came to assessing compliance of a design with the building regulations, for example?
Not sure they're entirely the same, but I felt that the TMO as a collective had the skill set to do the role.
I see. You mean across the individuals that they had within the organisation?
Yes. So they had their own, fire officers, their own health and safety officers, their own team that reviewed, specs and drawings and refurbishments elsewhere on their estate. So I was assured they could do the role.
Can we look at what Claire Williams has said about this in her witness statement? If we go to TMO 20853-697, and I want to look on page 7 at paragraph 32. So I just want to look at the first 5 lines of what she says here. She says, specifically, as described in detail above, Artelia were already providing services as CDMC, employer's agent and quantity surveyor. The CDMC role included taking reasonable steps to ensure that the designers complied with their duties. And then she quotes something from the CDM regulations 2015. And then she says, furthermore, in Artelia's form of appointment, they confirmed themselves to be designers. Do you see that there?
Yes. I think that's designer in terms of CDM regs, not designer in terms of design responsibility.
Yeah. And then she said, in addition to Artelia, Ryden had ultimate responsibility under the design and build contract, having also directly appointed Studio E. But in terms of what she says in that first paragraph, she seems to be saying that because of the services that Artelia were already providing, that was a reason not to appoint the CDMC role. And I'm interested, was that a view she ever expressed to you when you were on the project?
She certainly sought clarification from Artelia as to, are we doing design reviews as part of CDMC? And I said, no, that's not that role.
So the opinion
Ms. Grange, in your last question, you referred to not appointing Artelia to the CDMC role. Did you mean?
Sorry, I meant the CDA role. Apologies.
Yeah, perhaps the transcript could correct that.
Yeah. I think you understood my question. Nevertheless.
I did correct you. Yeah.
Did she ever say to you, well, we don't need the CDA role because some of that's already covered by your existing appointments? Did she ever say that to you?
Conversations like that happened, and I told her why that was an incorrect assumption to make.
Yeah, so you didn't agree with that?
Correct. It wasn't adversarial, it was just clarifying what was already covered under Artelia's appointments.
Yeah. And if we look down at what she says now at paragraphs 33 and 34, 33, she says, for these reasons, the TMO concluded that the scope of services that Artelia offered as CDA were already provided under other appointments. It did not see the justification in the role did not apply to specialist areas of construction such as cladding. And then she says, in hindsight, I wish that the TMO had been made the position outlined above clearer to Artelia. I think she means, in hindsight, I wish the TMO had made the position outlined above clearer to Artelia, reiterating that we expected them to fulfil the full duties of a CDMC and employer's agent, rather than simply stating we would take the CDA role. What is clear is we had every appointment in place under the CDM regulations required by law. So she seems to be saying there that there was somehow, that by saying they didn't want the CDA role, somehow she missed an opportunity to tell you that they wanted the full duties of a CDMC and an employer's agent. Do you understand that?
No. So we were an employer's agent and CDMC, and they had appointed everybody that they needed to under CDM regulations. You don't have to have a client design advisor. There's no requirement to have one. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. And just to be clear, it wasn't your position that you could make up for the lack of a CDA role by fulfilling fuller duties of a CDMC and employer's agent. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think I went to some lengths to try and describe that to her and explain that to her. And it was documented in the client design advisor role, how it was different.
You say you went to great lengths. Was that because she wasn't understanding the point, you think? Or was there something else going on?
I think it was, I don't know. It might have been partly misunderstanding. I think by the end she understood, definitely. I think maybe it was partly wanting to make sure she drew as much out of Artelia, and sometimes we did get drawn into things outside our scope.
Yeah. You say in your second witness statement at paragraph 12 that Claire Williams was reluctant for the TMO to incur the additional costs of the CDA proposal, and we touched on that earlier.
Yes.
To what extent did you think at the time of the rejection that saving money was a part of the TMO's motivation for rejecting this offer?
It certainly was a consideration, but I don't think it was the only part. I think they genuinely believed that they could do the role themselves, and were best placed for it too.
Yeah. What did they say about the cost of the role? We've seen that it was about £30,000 as the basic fee for this role, and then the possibility of extras. Did you ever have a discussion about that amount of money and whether the TMA were particularly concerned about that?
I don't remember anything particular other than just that. Could they do this role themselves? So therefore, do they need to spend that money? Yeah.
Now, we saw that in the email where she rejected the role, she said that she was going to monitor how it was working, and that any proposals for comment would have a respond by date. And then she said, can you please send any design proposals to myself and David Gibson? Do you recall there ever being any monitoring by the TMO of how the design sign-off process was working?
So what we used for changes and sign-off and things was there was a bit of a tracker as to when proposals were put forward, and therefore when a decision needed to come back. And I do remember on the project there being some times where I needed to support in the administration of that, so that everybody knew you've got a proposal, you've got 2 weeks to think about it and respond or ask or raise any queries. So it was, from my memory, it was actually Ryden that prepared this client change design tracker, because they were coordinating the design at that time. So they were the ones that were saying, well, here's what we're proposing, 2 weeks or so, come back to us. So we could just see where it's at any one time, and everybody knew, okay, it's with me to decide.
Did you understand that David Gibson himself would be checking the design and compliance in the way that a client design advisor would?
I thought that he would be supporting Claire in doing that, yes.
Were you ever aware of David Gibson actually performing any CDA functions or considering the design? himself?
I was aware of, Claire was our main point of contact, but I think she went back and she checked with all sorts of different people back at TMO about things as part of, I saw that in sort of correspondence, emails and conversations.
Yeah.
I don't think Claire didn't just do it on her own. She definitely consulted others at TMO.
Yeah. Now, if I can go back to the email chain where the proposal's rejected, ART 406464, and I want to look at the top of page 2. This is an email from you, 29th of August 2014, to Rishmal Harding, who was going to be the CDA if appointed, and also to Simon Cash. And you just say, sadly, TMO decided to be their own CDA, and you forward Claire Williams' email. Why was that regrettable? Why did you say sadly in that particular email?
Well, I think Rich Mel wanted to do the role, and she hadn't been appointed.
Were you concerned that the TMO's decision would affect the project?
No, I thought no.
Okay. Now, if we go up to the first page of this email chain, this is Simon Cash's response to you of the 1st of September. And we can see he says this. He says, Philip, I would like to think that with Ryden's approach so far, it should not be an onerous task. However, it is very important that we do not find ourselves being dragged into dealing with any any issues relating to compliance or design advice without it being acknowledged as additional work. So that was Simon Cash's response to you. And you've said in your witness statement, this is paragraph 50 of your first statement, that you understood Simon Cash to mean that there was not an onerous task because there were only a limited number of changes which would need to be approved. Is that right?
That's partly it, particularly, yes, because we weren't expecting loads of changes, so we weren't expecting lots of review to be required.
I see. And you also say that Ryden were building according to approved drawings, and therefore it was unlikely that many changes would be made. So your view seemed to be at that point, well, I don't think there are going to be many changes, so we can live with this. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
When you're referring there to approved drawings, when you say Ryden were building according to approved drawings, can you just help us what exactly you mean by that?
So largely, Ryden were not looking to alter very much from what was tendered to them. So Studio E, as the designers, had prepared it up to tender stage, and they've been novated over.
Yeah.
And largely, Ryden was saying, look, we're just going to build that, what you asked us to do. So we're not coming back to you with lots of changes or variations.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by approved, as in the client approved them to go to tender.
Yeah. At this point, did you have in mind the cladding? I mean, you obviously knew that there'd been some changes in terms of specification in the period since the contractor had appointed, and more finalisation of the materials to be used. Were you thinking about that when you thought to yourself, well, I don't think this will be a problem because there won't be too many changes? Was the cladding in your mind then?
Well, the cladding was always an item that was being reviewed because it was a large package, even pre-tender. So I don't know. I knew that was always going to be something that there were variations coming from it.
Yeah. Do you think the TMO was taking a risk in not appointing a client design advisor?
I don't know if I'd say taking a risk. I think they were not appointing additional specialist advice and support.
Right.
I mean, again, I reiterate that you kind of expect your designers to, they shouldn't be proposing anything that's not compliant or anything irregular. So the CDA is a check-in and a reassurance vehicle. So
Yeah. Now, moving on, in your first witness statement, you explained that despite not appointing a client design advisor, the TMO and Claire Williams in particular kept asking Artelia about design issues and issues that you considered to be outside the scope of Artelia's role. Is that a fair summary?
That is, yes.
And I just want to look at just a few of those now. We're not going to go to the detail that you've included in your statement. But if we can look at, say, ART 408627. This is an email from Simon Lawrence to you, CCing Nick Valente, and its subject is Grenfell Design. And in paragraph 1, he's dealing with a kind of upcoming meeting. And then in paragraph 2 of this email, he says, on top of this, I sat down with Claire this afternoon, and she has concerns about some of the design and is proposing changes, all of which is fine, providing it's done formally so everyone is in the loop. My only concern is that the designs she has concerns about are the tender drawings, which were obviously issued to us by the TMO. Admittedly, we are the designers, but I won't be expecting us to make changes to flat layouts, etc., off our own back. We would assume that they were correctly designed at tender. She also mentioned that designs needing to comply with KCTMO design guide. I haven't checked the tender docs yet, but I don't believe this has been issued to us, but I could be wrong. So plenty to iron out before we get far and changes become costly for no reason. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So it appears from this that Claire Williams had been proposing changes to the flat layouts, and Simon Lawrence was expressing some concern to you about that. Again, is that fair?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that Claire Williams was attempting to change the designs without having received advice or input from a designer, from someone with expertise in architectural design?
So what she was talking about was changing some of the lower floor layouts and purposes. So, from memory, it was things like, well, we were going to have an office there, but can we put another flat there? Things like that. They weren't necessarily need to be done by an architect. They were client design. They were client wishes and changes.
I see. Was it your view at the time that she didn't understand the implications of changing the designs?
No, she definitely understood, and I spent time with her and said, look, changes could well have impact on programme and could have impact on costs, and should only be made if absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Now, in paragraphs 165 to 167 of your first statement, you provide some further examples from October 2014, where there were, so the first one you give is there were concerns on the part of Ryden about Claire Williams attempting to change the size of the windows. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And then you also give an example that there was confusion over the sign-off of risk assessments and methodology statements following an instance where the boilers were shut off. Do you remember that?
I remember that incident, yes.
Now, I'm not going to ask you about the detail of those incidents, but I want to ask you some more general questions. At that stage, so this is what you're describing as examples from October 2014, did you have concerns about the TMO's understanding of roles and responsibilities on the project?
I don't think she had there was a confusion particularly. The windows bit was, it was genuine that she picked up that the windows were going to change on size, so that wasn't a role or responsibility issue. And we did need to explain the boilers getting shut off was purely how Ryden were doing the works issue, and it was a problem because residents ended up not having hot water for a couple of days, and we responded by saying, well, actually, Ryden have got to be responsible for managing how the works are done on site.
Yeah.
We as Artelia, in all our hats, don't approve how the works are sort of carried out. That's got to sit firmly with the responsibility of Ryden because they're managing the day-to-day works on site.
Did you ever suggest to the TMO that they should perhaps reconsider its rejection of the appointment of a client design advisor?
No, I don't think I did. I mean, Claire was fulfilling the duties. She was accepting proposals, going and consulting. Sometimes she was asking, my opinion on things, and I had to sort of point her elsewhere. But she was doing the duties.
I see. Yeah. So, looking back on it, do you think you should have advised the TMO that it should have reconsidered this, given how things then panned out on the project?
Well, yeah, in hindsight, it would have, maybe Richmel would have picked up some of the obvious issues that have occurred. Now we've seen things have gone, so
Yeah.
that's, in hindsight, potentially, yeah.
Now, again, just some more general questions here. After Ryden was appointed in March 2014, we know there were a number of value engineering design decisions that were taken, including in relation to the cladding. And I just want to ask you a little bit about the process of decision-making in that period. Was there any process, as far as you were concerned, to assess the impact of changing the design as a result of the value engineering that was done?
So there was a lot of value engineering on this project, and there were options put forward, and everything that was put forward, the consideration of, well, what's that going to change was considered. Now, most of it was around what's that going to do to cost. Some of it was what's that going to do to the programme, and obviously what's that do to sort of quality as well. So there were plenty of reviews. All of the professional team were engaged in the value engineering exercises, as well as Ryden when they were on board. So I think it was a very collaborative piece of work to review what could be value engineered and what couldn't. And proposals were put forward. Some were decided to proceed with, and some were not.
Okay. Just picking up, you talked about quality. To your knowledge, was there an assessment done of the potential changes in terms of value engineering and any reduction in quality that would result?
So the way value engineering goes is, I think the proposals might be identified by somebody and put forward, and then what's different with the proposal to the should be highlighted so that you can make an informed decision on the overall. And that process was worked through with the design team, because most of the proposals for changes came from material changes and design changes. Some of it was just excluding scope, and that's simple. So I think, but the onus of what are the changes in terms of quality is from whoever's putting forward that proposal, largely from either designers or Ryden. And then they were debated and reviewed and discussed for the client to decide yes or no.
Right. Was there any specific assessment of the potential changes in terms of risk to safety?
So there was lots of discussion around changes, but it was always assumed and implied that everything put forward would need to be safe. That's implicit.
But do you ever consider? Were you ever aware of a specific assessment being done of the potential changes in terms of any risk to safety?
So an example would be, at one point we were talking about changing the windows and how they were going to operate.
Yeah.
And what was put in were tilt and turn windows.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons that the value engineering to change that to a normal just opening window was actually it's safer to have tilt and turn, because you can just have your window like that. So yes, they were considered, but they were usually, they were considered.
Was it any part of your role to make sure that there was a change control process in place so that a qualified designer considered the impact of, for example, the change in the choice of cladding materials?
So I think we did have a change control process agreed, and documented, and that was one of the flow diagrams that I showed. We were working collaboratively all together in terms of what value engineering was taken forward. But the responsibility of design and safety, it was always, so for the cladding example, all of the debates about changes were all around aesthetics or fixing and planning. They were never around, is it going to be fire compliant or is it safe? Because that's just a given that designers have to design to the, health and safety requirements of the time.
Yeah. To your knowledge, did the CDM coordinator on the project have any input into the value engineering decisions in relation to the cladding materials?
Not particularly, no. He was more involved in sort of kick-off of the project and methodology of how works were maybe going to be done.
Yeah.
Asbestos and things was a big focus of his. So no, he wasn't. It's not really a CDM role in value engineering so much.
Well, it's really the consequences of the final decisions on the value engineering to say use different materials. It was whether or not you can ever recall the CDM coordinator being involved.
No.
Design change tracker, we've touched on this already, but I want to ask you some more questions about it. If we can go to ART 408861, this is an email from Simon Lawrence to you on the 24th of October 2014, and the subject is change tracker. And in the email, we get it from the first line, he explains that following a client design meeting, he says, I've put together a spreadsheet tracker for project changes as attached. Before I send it out formally, I wanted to run it past yourselves to make sure it works for you also. Basically, Ryden don't have a specific document to record change because it's normally done via email records, RFIs, drawings, etc. In my experience, some of the standard construction processes don't always work as well in refurb as they do in new build environment because of the way and timings that clients have to make decisions, often reactively. So we often find that parts of the project team get informed late, in particular the commercial side. Then it becomes hard work all round to catch up and reconcile what's happened. Anyway, I've put together this hybrid form from several others we have with the aim that it can serve as a record and audit trail of what has changed and why. It's only an overview sheet to use in conjunction with emails, RFIs, etc. It will also highlight any likely financial or programme change so the client doesn't get any surprises. And then he says, if as a team we feel it will work, then I'll add it to my monthly report. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember receiving this document and the attachment?
Yes. And
just before we go to the tracker that he proposed and the attachment, we can see he said there that Ryden don't have a specific document to record change because it's normally done via email records, RFIs, drawings. Would you have expected Ryden to have had a way of formally recording and managing design decisions?
I think what RFIs is usually the methodology that contractors use, which stands for Request for Information. But it can become quite a clunky and administratively, burdensome process. And I get what he was talking about there on refurbishments, because sometimes there are uncertainties. You find something and you need a sort of maybe faster answer than on a new build. So I supported his proposal of a simple change tracker to help with keeping an audit trail of what was needed when. But
I suppose what I'm getting at is whether you were surprised that Simon Lawrence had to put one together for this project and that there wasn't one that Ryden, as a standard, always used.
Well, I read this as he felt that this would be an easier way of using this than using their other systems, which have been RFIs. I'm familiar with other contractors that have very slick sort of online tools, but again, they can be quite clunky and administrative to manage.
Now, I think you've just said that you would agree with Simon Lawrence that there can be this distinction between new builds and refurbishment in terms of time for decisions needing to be made, unexpected things flashing up and you having to react. Is that correct?
Yes. You'd expect that less on
a new build. Yeah.
That's...
Does that have the consequence that sign-off of the design decisions and design changes is often rushed? And had it become rushed on this project?
It shouldn't have been, because a lot of what this was tracking wasn't actually finding out things like from the building necessarily. So it shouldn't have been rushed.
Had it become rushed on this project?
So there had been part of the reason for having this tracker was to create more visibility, because I think definitely the TMO were feeling they were perhaps not given the timescale to consider drawings and respond, and this was a direct response to that, so that it could be more transparent, more open, and know what was coming down the line.
Yeah.
So there had been some instances where they'd had to make decisions quicker than perhaps the 2 weeks or so that would normally be allowed.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the tracker he was proposing at this point. This is ART 408592. And I think it's right that you did provide some comments on this, but is it right that you didn't have any comments on the structure or format of the tracker?
It looked good to me. It was helpful.
You thought it was a helpful document?
Yes.
Yes. So we can see on the left you get the description of the change, any related information in terms of the drawing numbers, who it's been requested by, the date of the request, when it's been resolved and signed off, any cost and implication impact and programme impact are then recorded on the right-hand side. Now, moving on with this story, if we go to ART 408532, this is an email from you to Simon Lawrence and Claire Williams about the tracker, and this is on the 12th of November 2014. So Simon Lawrence had proposed this on the 24th of October 2014, and you now in mid-November pick this up, and you say this, you say, Simon, I'm concerned that I've not yet seen the tracker distributed following the design meeting held on 22nd of October. I commented on this on Friday the 24th of Oct and thought it would be a good document and process to adopt. On the tracker were some short timetables for decisions put upon KCTMO to meet the design development programme, and also a record of areas of design alteration to be carried out by your design team. I'm concerned that, because the tracker hasn't been seen, some of these deadlines may have been missed. Do you see that there? And then he says, as we agreed at the meeting, Ryden are responsible for managing the design development process and for seeking approval for alterations to tender designs and comments on 4 construction drawings. I just want to make sure that appropriate and fair time is given to Max Fordham and TMO to review and comment on drawings. There have been some difficult, quick decisions required recently for TMO, and you give examples of window and metering, and I want to ensure that going forward these type of things are avoided or recognised early to give time. So is it fair to say that you regarded this tracker as an important document at this time to make sure that design changes were properly considered by everyone who needed to consider them?
Yes, and I was chasing to see what Simon had done with it. I mean, I wasn't engaged directly in the design the design coordination. So Simon and Claire would be doing that directly without me. I'd only hear about it if a decision had been made that needed instructing as my role as employer's agent. So it may well have, at that time, I was just concerned, well, I haven't seen anything more, and I was chasing him because I thought actually it was a good document, and I didn't want Claire to be, any surprises going forward, and I wanted to make sure we were getting best value from the work that he'd already done.
Yeah. And is it right that you also regarded it as an important document to ensure that decisions and approvals were recorded in an orderly way?
Yes. I mean, I'd still need I'd still need to formalise decisions like instructions as employer's agent to the contract, but this was a sort of precursor to that, because there
Yeah.
might have been things that changed, they don't decide to do, etc.
Yeah. Was it within your role to make sure that Ryden were managing the design approvals process in an orderly way?
Yeah, to check that they had a system and process in place for managing the design.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's reasonable.
Now, you discussed this tracker and these documents in your first witness statement. For the transcript, that's page 52, paragraph 175. But you don't say what happened thereafter. Do we take it from that this wasn't progressed beyond Ryden's draft? Can you help us as to what happened?
I remember it being used more at the sort of as a document going forward. So I think it didn't die here. It was continued to be used.
Yeah.
But again, because I wasn't in the design meetings, I didn't see all of the iterations of it going through. I would only see when a decision was made, and therefore I needed to instruct the change as part of the contract. But
So to your knowledge, was this tracker in fact used?
I think it was.
Okay. Now, Mr. Chairman, I note the time,
Yes.
and I'm aware that this witness needed a slightly longer break before. Ideally, I would, because we've lost a little bit of time, perhaps just go on for another 10 more minutes and finish this subtopic.
Right, well,
But
just see how-
obviously subject to the witness feeling
Yeah,
able to do that.
we're getting
I'm
a
fine
little
with
bit
that.
behind time, but would you feel able to carry on for 10 minutes? perhaps
Yeah,
half an hour?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Fine.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So I just want to finish and look now at the design flow chart, picking up on this point about the design approval process. Now, you say in your first witness statement, this is paragraph 180, that in December 2014, Claire Williams expressed confusion about the design approval process. Let's look at what you say there. This is your first witness statement, ART 408527, page 54, paragraph 180. So you say, on the 4th of December 2014, I received an email from Claire Williams in which she expressed that she still had some confusion on the design approval process. She explained that her assumption was that Max Fordham reviewed the drawings first, and then the TMA would get the final version to comment on, but this was not what Ryden were doing. I recall that following this email, I produced a flow chart to clarify the arrangements for signing off on design changes, which I circulated on the 5th of December 2014. I believe that the reason for confusion was that there was more change than would normally be expected on a D&B project that was designed up to the level the project had been at tender. My aim was that the chart I had prepared would control the process better. During progress meeting number 6 on the 11th of December 2014, it was agreed that the design approval process set out in the chart would be followed by the team. So that's what you say there, and you referred to this earlier in your evidence of you introducing this. Let's look at that flow chart. This is ART 408757. So this is I think a flow chart, and it's headed Grenfell Drawing Approval Process. It's a draft. And I think what we can see is that there's a number of routes by which you get to construction issue drawings on the right-hand side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, did this chart only apply to the M&E aspects of the work, the M&E changes, or was it intended to apply to other parts of the project?
No, it's all drawings from what was issued like at the contract through to construction.
I see. So even though we've got Max Fordham here in a number of the boxes,
So
are we to read this as having applied, for example, to the drawing approval process for any cladding changes?
So it's not very easy because of the colours, but the bottom arrows are different colours. So you have contract drawing on the left,
Yeah.
and the colour for M&E changes is going out the top of contract drawings because there would be an M&E proposed change from the contract to construction. So Max Fordham would look at, I don't know, if they're changing the boiler arrangements, that would be something that would be within their sphere of reviewing.
Yeah.
So they would look at it, comment on it, and then if the change was agreed, it would be sent to Artelia for instruction, and then we'd instruct it, and then it would go to construction drawings.
Yeah.
So and if there was no change between the contract drawings and construction drawings, that's the arrow that comes out the bottom and just goes straight from one to the other.
I understand that.
And architectural changes, which would be like cladding, is the middle arrow. So TMO review the change, comes to us, instruct, and then goes to construction.
I see. So
But that's if
there's a
contractor-
change to a contract drawing in relation to the cladding design, it would go first to the TMO to review the change.
Yeah.
And then if the change was agreed, the revised drawing was sent to Artelia for instruction by either the TMO, well, here it would be the TMO, and then you go straight to the construction drawing.
Yes.
I see. So is there a step in this process whereby the change is reviewed by a design professional? We can see that would be the case for the M&E change where Max Fordham review the change, but what about the cladding change in the middle?
So I was I think at this time we knew that the TMO were performing that duty. That's why that middle box is there.
Yeah. And had the client design advisor been appointed, would it have gone to the client design advisor?
Yes.
And then the TMO?
Yes.
Yes. And where does Ryden sit in relation to this process?
So they're in control of the overall design. So their duty is to take contract drawings and develop them up to construction level so they can build it. So at contract, the design had been developed to a certain REBA stage, and there were still further design stages to go through before they could actually be built. So Ryden sort of sit as overall.
Overarching all
yes,
of this.
Yes.
I see.
And what I tried to pull out in that little box there, TMO wished to alter the tender drawings, because part of this was also Ryden saying to me, look, we were just going to build the contract drawings. We're not proposing. We don't really want to propose changes. We just want to make this simple. What you've asked for, we will build. And I wanted to factor in. Well, if TMO want to change a contract drawing, that needs to also be factored in, instructed, so that it's fair to Ryden to know. Okay, we've got to change that.
I see. Now, as we just read in your first witness statement, you explained that the reason this flowchart was needed was because the project had more change than would normally be expected on a D&B project that was designed up to the level the project had been at tender. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Did the fact that there were more than the usual number of changes prompt the need for this process, or would you have expected a similar process to be in place in any event?
So I put this, I think the process, this was to help clarify, because there was, for Claire really, this is not unusual within any construction project.
Is it right that before you proposed this draft flowchart, there was no agreed process for circulating and approving design decisions?
No, I think what was happening was it was happening in design meetings between Ryden and TMO, and it was getting more intricate and more volume, hence why needing more governance and structure and clarity on how everyone was going to do it.
I see. Given that Ryden was sat really above this and was, had overarching responsibility for getting that design approval, should it have been Ryden, in fact, proposing this sort of system and flowchart on the project?
Yes, it wouldn't have been unusual for them to do that. I took it upon myself to help with clarifying roles, and
Yeah.
it's my role, so it could have been as well.
I see. Now, we can see that you sent the flowchart to Claire Williams on the 5th of December 2014. For the transcript, that's ART 408600. Can you recall, was there any discussion between you and Claire Williams about it after you sent her this flowchart?
Yes, I think I walked it through with her, similar to what I've just said to here.
Yeah. And we can see, if we just look, this is the last reference I'll take you to, and then we'll stop. If we can go to ART 403302, these are the minutes of progress meeting number 6 on the 11th of December 2014. We can see in the present list that you and Claire Williams are present. And if we go to page 2 under item 3.1, we can see it says, it's under the heading Design Development, all agreed to follow presented drawing approval process presented by PCB. Is that you there, PCB?
Yeah, my middle name snuck in there somehow. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We won't ask you what it is.
Charles.
Okay. A fine name.
Thank you.
Did you present the flowchart at this meeting?
I did.
Was there any discussion about it at this meeting?
Definitely, it was a topic of importance at the time because of the concerns raised by both Claire and Ryden. So it wasn't a long discussion. I think everybody said actually that helps.
Yeah.
Clarifies. Let's follow this. That was the point of doing it. So I was pleased.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was that then followed going forwards, including on non-M&E elements?
I believe it was followed. Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for letting me
Right.
have that extra
No,
time.
that's good. Is that a convenient
It's a very
point to
convenient
stop?
moment. Yes, thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, Mr. Booth, we didn't go on longer than I thought we might. So we'll stop there for the day.
Okay.
I must ask you, I'm afraid, to come back tomorrow to answer some more questions.
That's fine.
10 o'clock, please, to start. And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything related to it
Of course.
once you leave the room. All right? So we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, would you like to go with the usher? Right, well, thank you, Miss Grange.
Thank you.
10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thanks.